If I could help you avoid every landlord mistake I've made and I've seen, I would certainly do it, but I can't. What I can do is share with you the major themes of mistakes I see landlords making in 2021. So that's what's in this video. I'm Jennifer Rowlands, landlord educator, advocate, and broker of One Focus Property Management. When we invest in real estate, it's easy to get sucked into the optimism and momentum of it all. But I see every year, but this year in particular, I'm seeing investors making mistakes that really could be avoided. It's costing them money, time, and frustration. And so today I'm going to give you the three major themes of mistakes I see rental property owners making in 2021, because I truly believe that mindfulness and constant educating of ourselves is the best way to overcome these pitfalls. The first major mistake I see investors making in 2021 is not having a complete lease. Okay, what does that mean? Well, truly, this mistake often takes several different forms, and I see it with almost every client I work with when we first onboard their portfolio. So not having a complete lease could mean not having a lease at all. It's simply a verbal lease, which, while legal in Pennsylvania, is a really vulnerable place for both landlord and tenant to be. It could be that the lease was executed partially, so maybe without all the information on it or with not all the signatures. Maybe it was signed completely, but now the document is lost and nobody can produce it. Maybe it's incomplete, so maybe it doesn't have your lead form for those properties older than 1978. Maybe it doesn't reflect a rent increase or a change in security deposit. The lease is really the basis of the relationship and the only device you have to enforce your rights as a landlord. And so I encourage you to not only make sure that it is complete, up to date, but that it's accessible. It's something that you can find quickly to reference if you're ever having an issue or need to enforce your rights. The second mistake I'm seeing consistently made by landlords and investors in 2021 is making decisions with bad information. Quite honestly, usually using stereotypes to make decisions. So landlords are always trying to avoid risk, and that's natural. One of the biggest decisions they have to make is tenant selection. And so it's really loaded with risk. And I think I'm seeing investors make more and more of these decisions based on really bad information, which is leading to bad outcomes. So this is what that might look like, what you might hear an investor or landlord say if they're making this mistake. So it might sound like this. Well, I've got a really good gut for these things. It could sound like, well, I know their boss or their ex-father-in-law personally. I'm a really good judge of character. If you are saying these things, stop. I implore you to stop. You are making bad decisions with bad information. So I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to avoid risk. But when we make those decisions with bad information, and the tenant selection criteria process being one of them, we're going to see bad outcomes. So for this example in particular, what could landlords be doing better? Well, they could be using objective, fact-based criteria relevant to the housing relationship. So they should be using a written application, verifying income, where it is coming from, that it is a constant source of income, and that it's in the amount that's sufficient for the rent. They should be checking credit history, they should be checking criminal history, and they should be looking into the landlord history, speaking with previous housing providers about how that relationship went in order to determine how this tenant's going to behave in a future housing relationship. This is one of those mistakes that takes a little time and it takes some experience. You can hire it out. So there are companies like One Focus that are doing this for our clients. You can also learn about it more by taking courses. So I implore you to really watch out for this second mistake and make sure that the information you're making decisions based on is good, objective information that is relevant to the decision you're making. The third mistake I want to chat about today is when landlords and rental property owners are conflict averse. And what do I mean by that? I mean, they really avoid conflict. They avoid where they believe a person they're going to be communicating with is going to have an opposing stance. They avoid moments where they know there could be an argument. They avoid maybe even delivering inconvenient news. And so when landlords are subject to this kind of conflict aversity, what it can mean is that they often lose. They often subjugate their position as a result of their inability to have this conflict. So what might it sound like, or what might it look like when a landlord's being conflict averse? Well, one example would be if their tenants are long-term tenants and those rents have never been revised, those leases have never been updated. That's sometimes a sign that a landlord is conflict averse. It may mean that the tenant doesn't pay rent on time, but always by the end of the month. And so that might suggest that the landlord is a bit conflict averse. Another way you might realize this is if the tenant has an animal in the property, maybe without having permission from the landlord, or they're in other ways not compliant with the lease, maybe not caring for the property or actively even hurting the property in violation of the lease, and the landlord isn't doing anything about it. When you're unable to tolerate conflict, you're really not able to manage your own property. See, managing your own rental property requires your ability to speak up and enforce your lease and enforce your rights, and sometimes that is inconvenient or uncomfortable. This is something you can get better at, but it does require practice. Much of the motivation to avoid conflict is fear. It's fear that you may not be able to handle the conversation, that the other person in the conversation might use emotions to scare you. And specifically to the landlord relationship, sometimes the fear is that the tenant could get so upset that they would move out, thereby rendering you having a vacant property. And operating from a place of fear is not one you want to do in your investments. Your investments should be run from a place of faith and optimism, not fear. So now, close to the end of 2021, that's my list of 3 things I see investors doing that are costing them money. I would consider them mistakes. Now, these are things that are easy to avoid, but it does take an investment in your education, your ability as a landlord, and some mindfulness to make sure you're doing things in a different way. I love making these videos for you. I hope you'll let me know if you like them. Do subscribe to our channel, and we have a Facebook group just for landlords in Pennsylvania, so give it a try. See what you find there.